Good morning. There's no shortage of explanations for what ails our democracy, and many of you in the room are experts on the various causes and symptoms. I want to pick up the question at the human level. Let me start with a few headlines. These are all recent pieces from a range of outlets that, some of which get at the challenges we're up against, some of which posit solutions. I would argue that a theme that cuts across is the belief that the health of our democracy is in part a function of the skills, habits, and mindsets that we exhibit. And our unwillingness and inability to listen to each other, let alone to engage constructively across our divides, is a pernicious problem. It's more pronounced in a democracy that is increasingly diverse, fragmented, and tribal. Now, working at a foundation whose mission is helping people get along better means that reading these headlines is a daily reminder that we have our work cut out for us. And this audience probably doesn't need convincing that any strategy for strengthening self-governance needs to contend with how we see each other, how we engage with each other at the citizen and leader levels, in person and in virtual spaces. That said, I do think we need a more expansive conversation about the skills and habits that are at the core of a healthy democracy. Many of you are leading the way in helping students and adults build civic skills, knowledge, and dispositions, and these are vital to effective participation. We also know that this is a dynamic field, as Kristen just described, with focused efforts on defining new skills for civic engagement in the digital age, with efforts to address the civic empowerment gap, and with efforts to bring a more experiential focus to how we tap into students' and adults' passions in the civic space. At the same time, I believe that there's a complementary, yet distinct, set of skills that are just as crucial to the health of our democracy, and yet often given less airtime. These are capacities that are more about how we relate with one another. They include empathy and kindness, respect for difference and intellectual humility, an ability to trust and work well with others, a sense of belonging coupled with the courage to speak out, an ability to find common cause despite our disagreements. One person who's written eloquently about this is our friend Parker Palmer, who way back in the simpler days of 2011 wrote a book called Healing the Heart of Democracy, and he named 5 habits of the heart that help make democracy possible. Now, even if we agree that these are important habits and skills and that they ought to be elevated in the conversation, especially now, we then come to a harder question. What does it take to actually develop the human side of democracy? Instilling and spreading these habits may seem especially daunting amidst the daily headlines of discord, distrust, dysfunction. The good news is there's a growing body of research that shows how empathy, kindness, the capacity to connect with others, including across groups, are deeply embedded in our psychology and biology. And there are organizations who put this research into action at multiple places along the developmental arc of human lives. Before we get into a few concrete examples, permit me to get a bit theory of changey for a moment. Research on human development and how people develop these relational skills and habits reveals the importance of learning by doing and being. These are not capacities you can acquire vicariously or from a book. 3 elements are particularly important: nurturing environments that help create a sense of trust, belonging, and community so individuals feel safe and included; supportive relationships that help people discover who they are and how to engage well with others; formative experiences in which repetitive positive action help people develop and practice behaviors that become part of who they are. Now, these are elements that are present in various ways and in combinations in all of the organizations that we work closely with, and we partner with organizations that support people in this developmental journey over the course of their lives. We actually organize our work by life stage: parenting and early childhood, K-12 education, campus, and community. So what I'd like to do is describe a few of these partners to give you just a brief glimpse of points along this developmental arc. In the earliest years of life, ages 0 to 3, a nurturing parent-child relationship is critical. It establishes and maintains emotional connection between the parent and the child. Anyone who's held a baby or a toddler, I have one of each at home right now, hence my loading up on extra caffeine, who's held that child as it gets fussy, knows the feeling of stress that emerges in a kind of chain reaction. And this anchor partner in our parenting portfolio, Nurture Science program, has codified the simple practices such as vocal soothing, eye contact, sustained touch, simple practices that restore a state of co-regulation between parent and infant, and the two become mutually attuned to each other's biological and emotional and behavioral cues. When parents provide responsive caregiving, it conditions young children to see that helping behaviors can improve the situation, and that doing so calms and benefits both the recipient of the help as well as the giver. The parent-child emotional connection sets the entire foundation for empathy and helping behaviors in these earliest days of life. Play. Play is one of the most important ways in which children learn and practice how to get along. Imagine you're a kid in the schoolyard and a classmate cuts in line or snatches a ball from you. Seeing a mix of wistful and vengeful recess flashbacks on people's faces. How would such incidents get resolved? By helping elementary schools make the most of recess through games and activities that promote engagement and agency, Playworks helps students develop and practice conflict resolution skills, a sense of belonging and fairness, and an ability to self-organize around shared goals. Studies have found that Playworks students are more physically active, teachers report students have greater feelings of school safety, less bullying behavior, and the American Academy of Pediatrics just a few months ago released guidelines on the power of play, citing research on how play promotes social and emotional, cognitive, and self-regulation skills that build the pro-social brain. Fast forward to middle and high school. History and literature are often taught as isolated subjects disconnected from discussion of current events and ethics. Think back to when you read To Kill a Mockingbird in school. For me, it was 6th grade. You probably read it as a classic of American literature, but what if it was also used as a springboard for reflecting on issues of race, gender, justice? That's how Facing History helps educators teach the book, helping students make connections between our history and the current moment. By combining the study of history, literature, and human behavior, students heighten their understanding of racism, religious intolerance, and prejudice. They increase their ability to relate history to their own lives and build greater ethical understanding of their roles and responsibilities in a diverse democracy. They make connections to current events and consider how they can act as upstanders as opposed to bystanders in their communities. Emerging adulthood, ages 18 to 25, is a formative period in which young people are shaping their identities and worldviews. The brain is still developing. We also know that the current college-going cohort is the most religiously diverse generation our country has ever seen. That diversity is neither good nor bad, it's just a fact, and it can be channeled constructively, but stakeholders on a campus often lack the skills and language and ability to do so. Think about how quickly tensions on a campus that have a religious dimension turn into conflict and hand-wringing. Interfaith Youth Corps partners with American colleges and universities to promote interfaith cooperation to create pluralistic campus environments, and the crux of their approach is equipping students with the skills of interfaith leadership. Respect for diverse religious identities, an ability to build positive relationships across faith differences, and the ability to engage in common action on issues of shared concern, even with disagreements about fraught questions. Service Year Alliance, Kristen spoke a little bit about the role of service and volunteerism. The challenges facing our democracy are exacerbated by the fact that we have few shared experiences as citizens. Less than 1% of Americans serve in the military, for example. And the reality that we have big social challenges that we're not adequately addressing and that require human capital. Service Year Alliance is working to make a year of service a common expectation and opportunity for all 18 to 28-year-olds as a way to tackle important challenges while transforming their own lives. Think City Year, Public Allies, Teach for America, Peace Corps, Youth Build. Service years have the power to revitalize cities, educate children at risk, and empower communities struggling with poverty. Participating in high-quality service fosters empathy, skills for collaborating with people of diverse backgrounds, and an ability to understand different perspectives. By working together toward common good, often within teams and alongside community stakeholders, those who serve build trust in their neighbors, a sense of civic agency, and an in-it-together mindset. Lastly, as debates about immigration reform continue, rapid demographic shifts are a reality in many of our communities across the U.S., sparking tensions, creating new challenges for both newcomers and longtime residents. The strongest communities are the ones that create environments focused on inclusion, where all people can take part in economic, civic, and social life. Welcoming America helps communities across the U.S. build the practices and policies to support everyone's full participation, with an emphasis on building bridges between newcomers and longtime residents in multiple contexts: schools, job training and mentorship programs, community centers, social spaces. These communities build a culture of welcome and belonging, demonstrate the economic case for inclusion, and help people broaden and rethink their views about immigrants and refugees. Now, all of these organizations are outside the Bridge Alliance, and several would not even use the language of democracy and self-governance to talk about their work or their impact. And yet that's precisely the point, because each of these organizations are cultivating fundamental skills and habits of democratic participation. I first got to know the Bridge Alliance a few years ago and a handful of its members when we launched our version of a response fund in the wake of the 2016 election, focused on supporting citizen-level bridge building efforts across the U.S. And we still believe that the work of bridging divides is absolutely urgent. That said, we put too much pressure on these efforts to mitigate tribalism if we don't also bring this developmental relational lens to the question of how, at every stage of life, we're preparing people to contribute to healthy self-governance. So I'll leave you with two questions that I'd love to explore over the course of the day. How can we rally around a bigger vision for the skills and habits we need to build in our citizens? And how can we use this low point, perhaps, as a wake-up call? If there is, as the new Hidden Tribes report finds, an exhausted majority of Americans who are tired of our divisions and see value in compromise and inclusion, maybe this is a moment of opportunity, not just for a new national narrative, but also a concrete plan for doubling down on the human side of democracy. Thanks.